What's going on, guys? Today we are going to talk about flipping, pitching, setup, how I set it up, what baits I like to use, rod and reel, that type of thing, line. Basically just kind of like a setup for somebody who's not maybe as familiar with this technique, or somebody who's wanting to get into it more. So here specifically at Lake the Ozarks, we have tens of thousands of boat docks. So that's something that these fish suspend under. They utilize year-round, something that you can pick apart basically any time of the year and catch fish on it. So we'll start with my rod and reel. Pretty much use Dobbins for everything. This is a Dobbins Champion Extreme, 7-foot fast action heavy. But actually my favorite flipping or pitching rod that I own is this Falcon Lowrider. This thing I feel like has just the perfect amount of flex in it, the perfect tip. It is also a 7-foot fast. Now, one thing to keep in mind, both of these rods are heavy power, but that's not created equal across the board. I would say this Dobbins and this Falcon are pretty much hand in hand on how they feel. But like you say, you pick up a St. Croix or something, I think their heavy power is a little bit more than these two rods. So as far as the reel, all I throw are Daiwa Tatulas, the OG ones really, but they make the SV is really good. I have one of those on a different rod. They make skipping and pitching reels for various brands. Use what you're comfortable with, but you want something that has good external braking, such as this has got the magnet dial you can do here in addition to your tension knob. Anything with that will get the job done, but if you get a little bit nicer reel, that will make this a little bit easier, especially if you're a beginner. As far as line goes, I pretty much throw 17-pound fluorocarbon. This particular stuff is Seagar and Vizex. Been really good line. I've used it for years. It doesn't break the bank. It's strong. Doesn't have terrible memory. Pretty abrasion resistant. I don't ever use braid here. I know some people probably flipping stuff with braid. If you're like fishing somewhere with really heavy cover, grass, things like that, that's where braid comes in. We don't really have grass here, so we pretty much just are focused on docks. You know, you want abrasion resistance because things can cut it. You have a lot of cables and stuff. So for me, fluorocarbon fits the bill. I'm just not a huge braid person. But as far as baits go, I would say my #1 bait is probably just a Zoom brush hog, green pumpkin like this. A lot of times I dip the tails in chartreuse because I'm trying to imitate a bluegill. Typically I peg it as well. You can see I have it pegged, and I almost always start with a 3/8 ounce weight. If I'm fishing really deep, I may go to a 1/2 ounce, or I want it to fall really fast, I may do that, but generally speaking, 3/8 still has a pretty good fall rate. It's heavy enough, you can get some good distance with it, but it's not too heavy to where it's wanting to drag it down when you're skipping. It kind of allows it to slide across the water a little bit as you're easing it into these places. But one thing to note when you are flipping and pitching is your weight is probably your biggest factor. Usually go into a little bit lighter weight and let that thing kind of float down. We'll get them. You pretty much have to figure out day in and day out when you flip a bait in, say around these docks here, is the fish underneath the dock, underneath the float, and he's following your bait to the bottom? Is he eating it on the way down when it never hits the bottom, or is the fish, you know, basically on the bottom and you fall down next to him, you hop it once or twice, and then he eats it? That's kind of what's going through my head, what I try and figure out daily, and that can help you figure out what type of weight you want. There's pretty much no end to what you can flip. If I'm Texas rigging anything for flipping, like I said, I'm normally pegging it just because that allows you to have much more accuracy. And then one other thing I like to add is a swivel right here. I don't know how well you can see that, but basically what you do is you rig your bait through the nose like a regular old Texas rig. Then you take your swivel, which you tie on in between your weight and your hook, and you take your other end and you poke it through, and you come up like that. You let this fall, bring your peg back down. It keeps it all together. Basically what this does is it keeps your bait from sliding down the shank of your hook and balling up. If you've ever used a Texas rig and you flip it in somewhere, you get a bite, comes back, you don't get the fish. Oftentimes this will be all slid down the hook and balled up. Been putting that on there for the last couple of years, and it seems to help. And bonus with it is you get a lot more life out of your baits. All right, so this is just a couple pieces of wood here. I like to have my reel set up first on here, about 8 or so out of 20, so it's about half on your magnet, whatever brand of reel you have. And I set my tension knob here to where I reel up, I let it fall, and if I let it go, it will actually overrun slightly. Let me do it again. It'll overrun if I don't stop it. So that's how I like to do it. If you're new, you should probably tighten this up just a touch, but you don't want it to be too tight. If you have this too tight, you'll actually fight yourself, and you'll make it harder than it has to be. And then a good rule of thumb is when you're actually doing your underhand style pitch, you pretty much want your bait to be level with your reel. If you have the bait too far down, like way below the rod handle, you won't be able to get like a smooth motion with your wrist, and you can still, you're almost like tossing it out there at that point, instead of using the rod. So reel her in, pretty much get her lined up, and what you're going to do is you're going to hold your bait like this. You're going to go sideways, and you're going to flip up with your wrist, so hinge up with your wrist as you're keeping a little bit of pressure on this hand, and then you're going to release it. Your goal is to keep it relatively low to the water. If you've ever watched somebody who's super good at this, like a professional, they can pretty much put it in the water with almost no splash. Like it just enters the water. And that's your goal, is to keep it really low to the water, and then you see that one kind of skidded across. We'll get to that with the docks, where you kind of can skip that in there a little bit. But this is just a good little technique to use in tight spaces. Areas where, yeah, you could sidearm cast this one pretty easy, but you'll get times when there's going to be overhangs where you really want to get your bait in there quietly, and you don't want a big old splash if you cast overhand or sidearm or something, so you kind of just ease it up in there. Oh, there's one. Oh, he just spit it out too. I was hooked on that branch. Oh man, look at that. He just broke my hook. Well, I had him. All right, that's a little example of a piece of wood. Like I said, there's scattered wood like this throughout like the Ozarks. Just got to go sometimes a little out of your way to find it, or different parts of the lake have more than others. Now we'll move on to docks here. First thing I notice, you have wind, you have shade. Those are the two most important things when you're dock fishing. I think shade trumps everything, but wind I think is the next best thing behind it. A lot of times you get docks like this that are kind of on their own, and I believe that there are fish that basically live around these docks year round. This is their home. This little area is their home. They don't really move. This is just where they spend their time. So you're trying to think, okay, where's this fish going to be? Now, when you get into rows of docks, I think there's times when you maybe get more fish that congregate, that move around, but these shallow, lone docks, you know, I think that's the exception to where you more or less just have one or two fish in the area. So when pull up to here, keep your distance. This is shallow water. I don't have power poles. So the number one thing you don't want to do is turn your trolling motor up really high and get too close too fast, and then you got to spin your head around like this, hit the trolling motor, and you blow all that out. That's the number one way I think to probably ruin your spot. So always try and keep a distance, keep your trolling motor on pretty low speed, so you can get around slowly. Now you have two options. You can kind of sidearm it in there and get it up quietly. You just have to do everything as quiet as you can, or you can do the underhand pitch. If I have the choice from a distance, I usually just kind of sidearm it up in there and then ease my way around. So I'm going to pretty much just fish all of the shade here. I'm going to get the easy targets first, that I don't have a chance of making additional noise if I have a bad cast, and then I kind of work my way in and get stuff that's a little bit harder, where if I do mess up, because I'm not perfect, nobody's perfect, you may not mess up the whole thing. Now you're going to hear some people say, if you hit something metal, move on, you know, the fish are spooked. I'm here to tell you, I will hit metal and I will immediately catch a fish, and it will be a good fish. So I think just keep on fishing, but obviously I try and go as quiet as I can. So I pretty shallow here, but pretty much flip it in there, let it hit the bottom, work it once or twice. And then I do the underhand kind of get it up there along the edge. Again, if you're looking at any dock, number one spot you can put your bait is the darkest shade of that particular dock, which is going to change throughout the day, different times, even times of the year, because the sun's going to be at different angles, different heights. So wherever you can put it that particular day in the darkest spot is where I'm going to start. That's easy to get to, and then I'm going to work my way to other parts that just have regular shade and see if you catch anything. Now this particular side here, you can tell sun's beating down on it, so you don't have a whole lot of shade. So if this was real easy to get to, I would probably cast in there, but since it's really not, I'm going to go ahead and skip it, because I don't think that's really a super high percentage spot on that particular dock. So now I'm going to come through and flip all of these holes right here. If you ever have a dock that has brush in any of this, that's also a bonus. If you can get wind, brush, shade, and have some bait, I guarantee you there's a fish that will pretty much be there. Just depends if they're willing to bite or not. And you kind of have to figure out what your style is, because boat positioning is really big of where you're at. You don't want to be too close, yet you don't want to be too far away, especially if you're a beginner. You want to be kind of a happy medium to here. So in this particular spot here, I could do an underhand pitch or I could do a sidearm. It just depends what you're comfortable with, what you want to do. I can do either one. I think probably just as efficient, but I feel like I probably have less chance of hitting a bar if I do a sidearm, if I have a larger opening like that. So that's kind of what I cater towards or lean towards. But I fish with other people that say the opposite. You know, they're more comfortable with the underhand style pitch. So that's kind of what you need to figure out. So here, this float right here, this is probably the darkest spot on the dock. So I would really guess, shade wise, I would get a bite in here if I'm going to get one on this dock. If you were to ask me where I was going to get a bite on this dock when I pulled up, I would point to the here, or I'd point to the backside where that wind was blowing in. But you will also be surprised sometimes, it just be random. So that's why I try and fish them pretty thorough if I think it's a good dock and a good spot. That was a terrible cast. Like I said, they're not all going to be perfect. All right, so we had one, but the hook broke on the little brush there that was sticking up, the lay down, whatever you want to call it, and then no takers on the dock. But that is how I approach either one. The wood's very, very simple. Just flip around it. It's pretty much as easy as it gets. It's more about just the technique of how to flip and how to do it quietly. The docks is a little bit trickier. You're going to be in a lot more tight spaces, awkward angles. I'd say the number one thing is boat positioning, especially if you're new. If you're fishing with a partner, it's even a little bit more tricky, especially if you guys are both new, because it's hard to both be in a good spot a lot of the times. So you're going to have to just kind of struggle through it if you're with a partner. And figure out, you're gonna have to be good at the underhand pitch type thing if you're fishing with a partner. That's pretty much the easiest way I think I can spell it out for you. But into summer, leading into the fall, kind of as we are now, it becomes a really good time. I think it's a time of the year when you need to be able to pitch, you need to be able to put a bait in quietly, put it in tight spaces in and around these docks to help make the most of the fishing, because fishing can actually get pretty tough this time of the year. And I think it's tougher if you can't do those things. So definitely something I would recommend practicing. Something you can do is put a little peanut butter jar or something like that, or a paper plate or something somewhere. You can put it in your living room if you want, and just sit there and just pitch to it. just keep doing it over and over and try and keep your bait low and move it around and just pitch to different things, or go in your garage or your driveway or something and kind of just get the feel for keeping that low trajectory. That's going to help whether you're just doing a regular pitch or you kind of morph it into the skipping type deal to get under these docks. But I'll put some of my tackle and stuff I like to use, the setup, in the description here so you can help find it or figure out what you might like. In the future, I'll probably do just a whole time-lapse thing, a whole real time of just fishing docks, and we'll just go through for like a day or something, or half a day, and just see what we catch, see where they're sitting, kind of we can figure it out together. And I'll just kind of show you, I guess, how I process it, how I like to break it down and figure it out, because there's so many docks here especially that you could waste a lot of time if you don't start paying attention where you're getting bites, and try and eliminate some of that dead water or the dead zone to try and keep you in those high percentage areas. So we'll see you on the next one, guys. Thanks for watching.